I have a challenge for you. Spend a single day without searching for meaning in anything. Simple, right? Now try a whole week. It already starts getting hard. Now, imagine an entire lifetime without demanding that everything have some greater purpose. Sounds absurd, doesn't it? Well, a man with a calm gaze and tuberculosis in his lungs proved that this is the only path to true peace. His name was Albert Camus, a Nobel laureate in literature. Born poor in a forgotten village, he was taken by a car accident before he turned 50. In the middle of that short life, he wrote some of the most liberating pages ever written about how to live when life stops explaining itself. Take a deep breath. What comes next might dismantle the greatest invisible prison of adult life, the obligation for everything to make sense. There is a kind of exhaustion that sleep cannot fix. It isn't the body that feels heavy, it's something deeper, quieter, something that arrives without asking permission on an ordinary afternoon while you wait for the coffee to finish brewing. Suddenly, the kitchen feels strange. The clock on the wall sounds too loud. You look at your own hand and think, who is this person making coffee? That moment has a name. Camus called it the awakening. It's the instant when the scenery collapses. The pieces that held up the daily performance fall away, and you see that you've been acting on a stage without even knowing it. The script was the job, the marriage, the house, the distant retirement. Everything seemed logical, until it didn't. Almost nobody talks about this out loud. People hide this exhaustion behind more work, more shopping, more travel plans, more goals for next year. But the emptiness doesn't go away. It just waits for you to be alone again, in an empty parking lot, in a quiet room, to come back. And every time it comes back stronger. Anyone who reads the journals of serious philosophers, from Marcus Aurelius to Henri Frédéric Amiel, will find identical descriptions of this phenomenon. It isn't a modern trend. It isn't the fault of the internet, the smartphone, or capitalism. It's an ancient condition of the human soul that adult life, sooner or later, ends up revealing. The difference is that today we live in a culture that no longer offers rituals for dealing with that recognition. The ancients had festivals, cycles of retreat, collective rites of passage. We have the rushed lunch break and the exhausted weekend. That's where philosophy begins. Not the philosophy of dusty books, but real philosophy. The kind that is born when life stops making sense on its own and you need to discover a new way to exist. Understanding philosophy is interesting. Practicing philosophy can change your life. Start with the link I left in the first pinned comment. Camus said there is only one truly serious philosophical question, and it is this: is it worth going on? It isn't a morbid question. It's the question that separates those who merely breathe from those who actually live. To understand why this man soared so far, we need to know where he came from. Albert Camus was born in November of 1913 in a poor village in Algeria, then a French colony. His father died in the First World War before Albert was even 1 year old. His mother was illiterate, nearly deaf, and worked as a housekeeper in family homes to support her children. He grew up in a house with no books, no electricity, no running water. Poverty wasn't an abstract concept. It was the empty stomach, the winter without heating, the silence of a mother too exhausted to talk. But there was light, the violent light of the Mediterranean sun, the sea just a few kilometers away, the streets full of smells and voices. Camus learned early on that life could be harsh and beautiful at the same time, without contradiction. An elementary school teacher, Louis Germain, saw something in that skinny boy and insisted that he keep studying. He secured a scholarship for him, pushed him into the lycée, and later into university. Camus studied philosophy, despite the tuberculosis that nearly took him down at 17, and would stay with him for the rest of his life. He became a journalist, a playwright, a novelist. In 1957, at the age of 43, he won the Nobel Prize in Literature, one of the youngest people in history to receive that honor. 3 years later, a car accident took him, with an unused train ticket in his pocket. He used to say that nothing was more stupid than dying that way. And that is exactly how he died. Life, in a sense, had the last word, confirming the philosophy he had spent his existence writing. What matters to understand is this: Camus was not an armchair philosopher. He was not a comfortable professor writing about pain from a cushioned seat. He lived through poverty, illness, war, exile, loss. He fought in the French resistance against the Nazi occupation, edited underground newspapers under constant threat. When he talks about the absurd, about cosmic silence, about the difficulty of finding meaning, he speaks with the authority of someone who searched and didn't find, and kept living anyway. That's why his thinking speaks so directly to anyone who has already been down the road. Young people might find Camus dark. Anyone who has lived a little knows he is, in fact, one of the most honest thinkers who ever existed. He doesn't offer cheap consolation. He offers truth. And in the end, he offers a kind of peace that no ready-made religion can provide. The central concept of Camusian thought is laid out in a book published in 1942, titled The Myth of Sisyphus. The book opens with a sentence that echoed through the century. There is only one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is the decision to end one's own existence. Deciding whether or not life is worth living is answering the fundamental question of philosophy. Everything else comes after. But what does Camus mean by the absurd? Many people confuse it with pessimism, with nihilism, with despair. It is none of that. The absurd for Camus is not in the world and not in us. It lies in the clash between two things. On one side, the deep human desire for life to have meaning, order, explanation. On the other, the absence of any echo in the universe, which does not respond, does not explain, does not guarantee anything. Imagine someone shouting a question inside a dark cave, expecting the cave to answer. The question is legitimate. The lack of an answer is also legitimate. The absurd isn't in either one. It's exactly in the space between the question and the still air. It is that tension, that mismatch, that friction between what we want from life and what life actually offers. Realizing this is not falling into a pit. On the contrary, it's climbing to a higher vantage point and seeing the real landscape for the first time. Camus insisted that the absurd is lucidity, not sadness. It's about taking off the filters of illusion and looking at the world as it is, without fantasies, without personal mythologies, without empty promises. Most people spend their whole lives avoiding that view because it's frightening at first. But those who cross through discover something rare, the freedom of no longer needing to lie to themselves. Camus wrote these ideas in the middle of the Second World War, when Europe was watching every consoling narrative about progress and civilization collapse. The extermination camps, the bombed-out cities, the lives cut short without any acceptable explanation. All of it forced an entire generation to face the emptiness of old explanations, in a way earlier generations had managed to avoid. The absurd, then, wasn't an academic abstraction for Camus. It was the very breath of the time he lived in, and we see it resurfacing today in different forms. In every news story of catastrophe, in every injustice without an answer, in every life cut short for no visible reason. And this is where we get to the theme of this video, the problem of searching for meaning in everything, that demand we carry around without even noticing, that every single thing that happens must have a reason, a hidden purpose, a lesson to be extracted. A person loses their job and asks, what does this mean? A relationship ends, why did this happen to me? A diagnosis arrives, what is the universe trying to tell me? That question seems harmless, it even sounds spiritual. But Camus shows that it is the root of a deep and silent suffering. Because when you demand that everything have meaning, you turn every pain, every loss, every unexplained event into a riddle that must be solved before you can move on. And since most things simply happen, with no author and no script, you get stuck deciphering ghosts. Think about how many hours of your life you've spent trying to understand why someone acted a certain way, why certain doors closed, why certain losses came at the worst possible moment. Think about the energy you've invested in building narratives to justify what deep down might have had no justification at all. That's exhausting. And that exhaustion has a name. It's called the obsession with meaning. Camus doesn't deny that some things have meaning. A gesture of love has meaning. Work well done has meaning. An honest conversation has meaning. Those meanings are built by us, in the small choices of everyday life. The problem is something else. It's expecting life itself, as a whole, to come with an instruction manual, with its purpose printed on the cover. It doesn't come that way. It never did. And those who accept this fact stop banging their heads against a wall that doesn't exist. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, whom Camus read carefully, called this the sickness unto death of modernity, the demand for absolute certainty in a world that doesn't provide it. A century after Kierkegaard, Camus tightened that knot even more. He showed that the search for the grand meaning is, paradoxically, what pulls us the furthest from the small possible meanings. Whoever keeps staring at the horizon looking for a majestic destiny doesn't see the stone they're about to trip over. or the flower that sprouted right next to it. Nobody is coming. It might sound harsh, but there is enormous relief hidden in that realization. When you accept that life doesn't need to explain everything, something heavy falls off your shoulders. You stop processing every event as a riddle demanding an immediate solution. You let things happen. You observe, you breathe, you move on. Not everything needs to become a lesson. Not every pain needs to yield a takeaway. Sometimes pain simply came, passed through, and what's left is to keep going with tenderness. To illustrate this condition, Camus turned to one of the oldest myths in Greece. Sisyphus was a cunning king, condemned by the gods for having defied mortal limits. The punishment was cruel and creative. Push a huge boulder all the way up a mountain. Every single time the stone got near the summit, it would slip from his hands and roll back down to the foot of the hill. Sisyphus had to go down, start over, push again, forever. No end, no pause, no hope of completion. Camus looks at this myth and says, "This is us. Modern life is Sisyphus wearing office clothes. Wake up, work, sleep, wake up again, pay bills, solve problems, put out fires, push the week's mountain up and watch, on Friday night, the boulder roll right back down. Monday morning, it all starts over." Decades pass like this. And one day, you look in the mirror and find grey hairs where certainty used to be. Anyone who has worked a lifetime recognizes that image without needing it explained. Saying this isn't pessimism, it's description. Routine has something relentlessly circular about it. The question Camus raises isn't naive. It isn't, how do I escape this repetition? Escape is impossible. The stone will always roll back down. The real question is different, more mature, more useful. How do you live inside this repetition without losing your mind? How do you push the boulder every day without turning your own life into a punishment? The boulder is yours. Camusian thought starts to shift in tone here, because he isn't going to offer you an escape. He isn't going to promise that one day you'll reach the top and get to rest. He's going to offer something rarer, a way to carry the weight without being crushed by it, a way to look at the repetition without falling into despair. That is his real contribution for anyone who has already grown tired of the empty promises of success culture. Camus examines 3 exits people tend to take when they encounter the absurd. 3 escapes, really. 3 ways of not facing what needs to be faced. It's worth looking at each one, calmly, because you've probably tried all of them at some point in your life, even without knowing it. The first exit is total surrender in the face of the absurd, the voluntary abandonment of existence, and Camus discusses it with tremendous seriousness. He does not judge anyone who reaches that point. He acknowledges that, from a certain perspective, it's a logical response for someone who finds life unbearably meaningless. But he argues, with gentleness and firmness, that this exit is a surrender. It's giving up on the only thing that is truly ours. It's closing the book before finding out that the story could have been read another way. Out of respect, we won't go into detail here, but let the record show. Camus looks at that pain with gravity, without romanticizing it and without dismissing it. The second exit is more common, and for that reason more dangerous. Camus calls it philosophical surrender. It's the act of taking refuge in some closed system that promises to explain everything. It could be a dogmatic religion, a political ideology, a spiritual guru, a conspiracy theory, a self-help lifestyle that guarantees everything happens for a reason. The name of these escapes changes. The structure is always the same, accepting a ready-made answer in exchange for giving up your own capacity to think. The dogmatic escape looks virtuous, but Camus shows it as a subtle betrayal. You choose the false piece of dogma over the uncomfortable lucidity of doubt. You stop asking questions because someone has already handed you the answers. You give up your own inner life in exchange for a ready-made script written by others. And when reality punctures that script, and it always does, the collapse will be even worse, because now you haven't just lost meaning, you've also lost the crutch that was holding you up. The most painful version of this escape is when it happens inside the home, without anyone noticing. A person adopts, without much reflection, a set of inherited beliefs, a life guided by manuals, a schedule packed with rituals that no longer mean anything. On the outside, everything looks organized. On the inside, the emptiness they were trying to avoid grows every day because it was never confronted. Running from the absurd doesn't eliminate it. It just pushes it down into a basement where it gets stronger, darker, harder to face when it finally resurfaces. The third exit is cynicism. Mocking denial, that way of being that pretends not to care, that turns everything into a joke, that dresses up in irony to avoid admitting its own wound. The cynic hasn't surrendered and hasn't given themselves over to dogma. They've simply shrunk. They've gotten small. They've turned life into a series of shields. Contempt, sarcasm, emotional distance, that armor that protects but also isolates. Camus sees this posture as the saddest of the three, because the person who chooses cynicism knows they are lying to themselves, but prefers the lie to vulnerability. They prefer mockery to commitment. They prefer to laugh at meaning, rather than discover that maybe it would have been possible to build some. This exit eats people up from the inside, slowly, like a quiet rust that corrodes the ability to feel, to fall in love, to believe in anything. Camus refuses all three, not because he's an optimist, not because he believes in happy endings, but because he sees a fourth possibility, harder and more honest, one that asks for courage instead of comfort. And what comes next is a silent gesture, almost imperceptible, that Camus makes before he hands you that fourth exit. A gesture that many people read right past without noticing, and because of that, they don't understand what comes after. Pay attention. In a few minutes, you'll recognize that gesture. Camus has a fierce, almost uncomfortable critique of a word that nearly everyone considers positive: hope. He isn't talking about everyday hope, the hope of small gestures, of planting a seed and waiting for it to grow. He's talking about the grand hope, the metaphysical kind, the kind that shoves life toward an imagined future and abandons the actual present. That kind of hope, Camus says, is a powerful anesthetic. You postpone life. You tell yourself, one day everything will make sense. Once the kids grow up, it'll be different. When I retire, then I'll finally live. In the next life, in another dimension, on a higher plane, that's where it'll all be worth it. Meanwhile, the real afternoons pass. The silent dinners happen. The sun comes through the window and nobody's paying attention. That posture, so common, so culturally celebrated, is for Camus a way of betraying your own existence. It's preferring the promise of a hypothetical tomorrow to the concrete encounter with today. It's living with your back turned to the present, your eyes always fixed on a horizon that never arrives. And when the end finally approaches, the surprise is realizing that real life was the one you ran through without noticing, thinking it was still about to begin. This is life. Maturity, for Camus, is landing. It's stopping living in the future. It's looking around and recognizing that life is this. Right here, this chair, this cup, this breath, this sound from the street. Nothing else special is coming. Nothing else needs to come. What you have in your hands right now is already everything. Accepting that without bitterness is the beginning of the freedom he spent his life trying to describe. This idea appears, with great literary force, in the novel that made Camus famous worldwide, The Stranger, published in 1942, the same year as the essay on Sisyphus. The book opens with one of the most famous sentences in 20th century literature. Mother died today, or maybe yesterday, I don't know. That dry, almost indifferent sentence already announces the kind of character we're about to meet. Meursault, the protagonist, is an ordinary man working at an office in Algiers. He isn't evil. He isn't cold. He simply refuses to perform emotions he doesn't feel. At his mother's funeral, he doesn't cry. The next day, he goes to the beach with a co-worker. He laughs, swims, has sex. Through a chain of circumstances, he ends up taking a man's life on a beach under the blinding sun. He is arrested, tried, condemned. What's striking about the novel is that the courtroom doesn't really care that much about the crime itself. What it cares about mostly is the fact that Meursault didn't cry at his mother's funeral. That, in the eyes of others, turns him into a monster. He is condemned deep down for not pretending, for having been incapable of performing the correct grief, the correct remorse, the correct pain at the expected moments. Camus isn't defending the crime. He's showing something subtler. A huge part of human suffering comes not from the facts themselves, but from the constant pressure to perform feelings we don't actually feel. Smiling at family gatherings when you want to disappear. Faking interest in conversations that say nothing. Showing enthusiasm for achievements that, deep down, don't move us. Acting out grief for losses that didn't really hurt us much, and hiding grief for losses that tore us apart inside. That constant performance wears down the soul. You spend years acting and forget what your face looked like before the masks. Meursault, at the end of the book, finds a kind of brutal serenity. He accepts his own fate. He accepts the absurdity of the trial. He He accepts that the universe doesn't care about any of this. And in that recognition, he finds a peace that the judge, the priest, the whole of society cannot understand. The lesson is clear and painful. Freedom begins the day you stop pretending. You don't need to become someone rude, someone cold, someone without compassion. But you do need to stop performing emotions that don't live inside you just to please the invisible audience of social life. That authenticity is frightening. At first, it costs you friends, costs you approval, costs you comfort. Over time, it gives back something worth more than all of those combined: ownership of your own face. A few years later, in 1947, Camus published the novel many consider his masterpiece, The Plague. The story takes place in the Algerian city of Oran, suddenly gripped by a mysterious epidemic. The streets empty out, the hospitals overflow. Pain becomes a constant neighbor. Nobody understands where it came from, why, or how long it will last. The central character is Dr. Rieu, an ordinary physician with no heroic ambitions. He doesn't try to explain the plague. He doesn't ask what the cosmic meaning of that suffering could be. He simply works. He examines patients, applies what he can, checks the paperwork, moves on to the next bed, while everyone else looks for someone to blame, for scapegoats, for spiritual lessons. Rieu just acts Camus through this character, delivers one of the most practical teachings in contemporary philosophy. Meaning is not something you find by sitting still and thinking. It's something you create in motion by acting. It isn't an answer that falls from the sky. It's a direction you carve with your own footsteps. Whoever waits for meaning in order to act never acts. Whoever acts discovers along the way that there was meaning, even though no one had promised it. For anyone who has spent decades looking for answers in books, courses, therapies, spiritual masters, that shift is almost revolutionary. You had been searching for meaning as if it were a lost object. Camus shows that meaning isn't a noun, it's a verb. You don't find it, you make it. You don't discover it, you build it, one simple gesture at a time. Think about your own path. The moments when you felt most whole were probably not moments of intellectual discovery. They were moments of action, caring for someone who was sick, finishing a hard piece of work, planting something and watching it grow, talking with a friend on a rainy day. None of those moments needed to be explained in order to be meaningful. They simply were. And that was enough. The universe doesn't answer. There is an interesting parallel with the thought of the American philosopher William James, who back at the end of the 19th century was already arguing that the truth of an idea is measured by its ability to organize action. Camus, without being a pragmatist in the strict sense, arrives at a similar conclusion. Meaning isn't a static thing waiting to be discovered. It's a function that is born in the act. When you care, caring generates meaning. When you build, building generates meaning. When you love, love generates meaning. Stopping action in order to think too much about meaning is, at bottom, a sophisticated form of paralysis. This active posture, this engagement without expectation, is what Camus called revolt. But be careful with the word. Revolt here is not anger. It is not destruction. It is not breaking away from everything in an adolescent impulse. Revolt, in the Camusian sense, is a mature existential posture, described in depth in the book The Rebel from 1951. To revolt for him is to say two things at the same time. To say no to the absurd in the sense of refusing to resign yourself to the silence of the universe as if it decreed our defeat, and to say yes to life in the sense of going on, despite that lack of an answer. Building, loving, working, caring. It is the posture of an adult who has seen too much to be naive, but who firmly refuses to accept bitterness as a final state. The Camusian rebel is not the loud rebel of the movies. He doesn't smash windows, he doesn't shout in public squares. He is deeper than that. He is the person who keeps planting gardens even knowing autumn will come, who keeps writing letters even knowing many won't be answered, who keeps loving, even after many losses, because he realized that love doesn't need guarantees to be worth it. This may be the most beautiful image Camus leaves us with. The rebellious human being is the one who looks the absurd in the eye without looking away and still chooses to care, chooses to take things to heart, chooses to build something even knowing it will all end one day. It isn't dramatic heroism. It is a calm, everyday, almost invisible courage. It is the kind of courage that keeps the world going. It is the person who takes the key out of the front door when coming home, feels its weight in their hand, steps inside, turns on the light, puts the water on to boil, and in that tiny gesture reaffirms once more that life is worth it, without needing to prove it to anyone. Hold on to that word, revolt, because it will come back soon in a way you're not expecting. There is a sentence at the end of the essay on Sisyphus that, on a first reading, seems like a translation error, a logical misstep. A lot of people close the book thinking Camus lost his mind right there, and yet that sentence is the heart of everything he wrote. We'll get to it. And contrary to how it might sound, this revolt is not solitary. In The Plague, Camus writes a beautiful line. What we learn in the midst of suffering is that there is more in human beings to admire than to despise. When the epidemic passes, what stays in the city's memory is not the acts of cowardice. It's the anonymous gestures of care, the neighbor who brought food, the nurse who stayed one more hour, the teacher who called to ask how the kids were doing. Authentic revolt, Camus says, is a form of solidarity. The moment you recognize that the absurd touches everyone, that every person around you is also carrying the same emptiness of explanations, isolation dissolves. You realize you are not alone in this strangeness of being alive. Everyone is, and something sweet is born out of that. A fraternity without speeches, a belonging that doesn't require credentials. That recognition changes the way you look at people on the street, at work, in line at the supermarket. Each of them also wakes up sometimes in the middle of the night, opens the fridge to get a glass of water, and in that yellow light hitting their face, standing in the dark kitchen, they also ask themselves, why? Each of them has losses, fears, longings they never tell anyone about. When that sinks in, the urge to judge goes down, the urge to compete goes down, the urge to prove something goes down. In their place, a kind of quiet tenderness grows toward other people. It's important to distinguish this tenderness from pity. Pity looks down from above, as if the one feeling it was safe and the other were lost. Tenderness is horizontal, it's sideways. It walks alongside. It recognizes, without superiority, that the path is similar, the exhaustion is similar, the longing is similar. Camus, in Letters and Notes, describes this feeling as the quiet foundation of any real ethics. Not the grand moral theories of the books, but the concrete gesture of understanding the other person as a companion on the crossing. Breathe. That tenderness, for Camus, is the opposite of totalizing ideologies. He was harshly criticized throughout his life for refusing to blindly join political or religious systems. He broke with Jean-Paul Sartre, another giant of French philosophy, precisely because Sartre defended certain totalitarian regimes in the name of supposed higher goals. Camus saw, before many others did, the danger of systems that promised to explain everything. His logic was relentless. Every ideology that promises a total meaning, a cosmic purpose, a final explanation, ends up justifying violence. If you know exactly where history is supposed to go, anyone standing in the way becomes an obstacle. Any individual life becomes insignificant in the face of the grand narrative. That's how it was in the 20th century, with its totalitarian regimes, its camps, its countless victims sacrificed in the name of luminous futures. History proved Camus right, and it keeps proving him right. This distrust of oversized answers is a valuable wisdom. You've seen plenty of absolute truths collapse, spiritual fads that were going to save the world and then disappeared. Gurus who promised everything and ended up exposed. Ideologies that seemed flawless and then showed their cruel face. Over time, you learn to be suspicious of anyone with too many certainties. Camus turns that intuition into a conscious philosophical posture. This isn't about falling into a lazy relativism where anything goes. Camus doesn't accept that. He stands for concrete values, human dignity, compassion, honesty, beauty, freedom. But those values have to be lived day to day in small choices, not imposed from above as cosmic truths. The good isn't a theory, it's a practice. And practice demands humility, because no one has a monopoly on reason. Camus was deeply sensitive to the beauty of the world, not the abstract beauty of German philosophers with their difficult categories. Concrete beauty, the Mediterranean Sea crashing against the rocks, the noonday sun in Algeria, so strong it seemed to wipe out thought. The stone streets of a small village, the smell of a fig tree in summer, the cold touch of a steering wheel on an October morning, the steam rising slowly from a cup of tea. In lesser-known texts like Nuptials and Summer, Camus celebrates that sensory dimension of life with rare poetry. He describes the body stretched out on the sand, the salt water on the skin, the warm afternoon wind, and in every detail he suggests something important. Contemplating the beauty of the world is a form of resistance to the absurd. Those who learn to truly see don't need the world to have meaning. It's enough that it simply is, and it is. It's enough that it is. That aesthetic sensitivity isn't a decorative detail. It's a structural part of Camus' philosophy. If the universe is silent, if no one owes us an explanation, what is left for us? What's left is what is here now, right in front of our eyes. The texture of the wooden table, the tea cooling in the cup, the afternoon light coming through the curtain, the smell of wet earth rising from the yard after the rain. All of that exists. All of that is real. All of that can be perceived, felt, honored with full attention. Many people spend their lives chasing special experiences, unforgettable trips, memorable events, without realizing that real life is in what happens between those events. On the way home, on the Sunday with no plans, in the moment before sleep, when the house is dark and all you hear is the tick of the clock. Camus suggests that the kind of happiness that is actually possible, the kind that isn't an illusion, lives in those quiet places. Those who learn to see them discover an inexhaustible richness hidden in plain sight. The great obsession of the contemporary world is time, the future mostly. We plan, we predict, we project. Advertising, marketing, the whole culture trains us to live for tomorrow. Camus pushes back against this with an almost stubborn insistence. The present, he says, is the only real territory. The past is already gone. It doesn't exist anymore. It only lives as memory, which is a form of fiction. The future isn't here yet. It may never be. It's also fiction. What actually exists is this instant, this breath, this moment in which you're listening to these words. If life is happening somewhere, it's here. There's no point in running forward. There's no point in looking back. The present is all there is, and it is more than enough if we know how to truly inhabit it. This lesson is especially powerful for anyone who has spent decades chasing goals. For anyone who ran after promotions, purchases, achievements, plans that always push the moment of truly living somewhere further ahead. Camus points out, gently, that you may have lost whole years by always looking forward, without noticing what was already happening around you. The good news is that the present is still here. It didn't vanish. You just have to come back and inhabit it. Coming back to the present doesn't require complicated techniques. No app, no retreat in some faraway place, no expense at all. It just requires attention, noticing the taste of what you're eating, listening to the voice of the person talking to you without thinking about what you're going to say next, feeling your feet on the floor when you're standing up, looking up at the sky at least once a day. Those small things, stacked up over time, change the quality of your entire existence. There is a quiet experiment worth trying. Pick a task you usually do on autopilot, like washing the dishes or walking to the bakery. Do that task just once, with full attention, feeling the warm water, hearing the sound of your steps, noticing the air in your lungs. At first, the mind complains. It wants to go back to the past, run off into the future, plan, review, judge. Stick with it for 5 minutes, just 5. By the end of those 5 minutes, something has shifted. You feel more whole, more present, almost lighter. That's the kind of small everyday miracle Camus, without using those words, was trying to describe. Inside that fully lived present, the deepest freedom Camus describes is born. The freedom of the person who has accepted the absurd. It sounds paradoxical. How can there be freedom in recognizing that the universe is silent? Precisely because of that. If there is no cosmic script written somewhere, no one has the right to demand that you follow a specific path. If no one knows the final meaning of life, no one can impose their own as mandatory. This freedom is different from youthful rebellion. The kind you see at 20, wanting to break away from everything, shatter rules, shock the family. That one is loud and depends on others, because rebellion only exists in opposition to something. Camusian freedom is inner, quiet, it doesn't need witnesses. It is the freedom to choose your own pace, your own values, your own retreats, without having to explain yourself to anyone. You can decide to slow down at work. You can decide to spend less time around people who drain you. You can decide to stop going to certain places that only produce noise. You can decide to spend more time in nature, or with a few true friends, or alone in good company with yourself. None of those choices need to be justified in grand terms. It's enough that they make sense to you in your concrete present. That quiet sovereignty is what many look for and few find, because it requires giving up outside approval. It requires tolerating that some people won't understand your choices and not backing down because of that. It requires accepting that, in the end, Each person is responsible for their own life, with no excuses, no one to blame, no rescues. It's heavy at first, then it becomes relief, then it becomes peace. Camus ends The Myth of Sisyphus with one of the most striking sentences ever written in contemporary philosophy. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. This is the sentence that, earlier, seemed like a translation error. Here it is whole. For many inattentive readers, that sentence seems like an even bigger absurdity than the absurd the book describes. Happy? How? Condemned to push a stone for eternity, never arriving anywhere, with no hope of finishing. Happy? In what sense? When you think it through calmly, the depth of that sentence emerges. Sisyphus is happy in Camus' argument because the mountain is his, the stone is his, the effort is his. No one can take from him what he is doing. Every step up belongs to him. Every descent, every drop of sweat, every tensed muscle, all of it is his. The life is his. And the moment he fully accepts that ownership, without complaining that it isn't some other life, he becomes master of himself, even while being a slave to the gods. That reversal is devastating and liberating at the same time. Happiness in Camus' reading doesn't come from the result. It doesn't come from reaching the top. It doesn't come from conquering the stone, defeating the mountain, hearing the final applause. Happiness comes from the full ownership of your own path, from recognizing that this trajectory, with all its repetitions and difficulties, is your life, and that it's worth living it in its entirety instead of complaining your way through it. There is a rarely discussed passage in the essay where Camus describes the exact moment Sisyphus finds that happiness. It's not when the stone is at the top about to roll, it's on the way down. When Sisyphus walks back down the mountain to start over, he walks alone, quietly, thinking. And it is in that moment, his gaze on the ground, his heart aware, that he becomes superior to his fate, stronger than the stone, because he recognizes, weighs, accepts. The consciousness that could have been the source of his pain becomes, through its own lucidity, the source of his dignity. Apply this to your own story. Your routine has elements that repeat. Your days look alike. Your obligations come back. The bills show up. The problems resurface. You can spend the time you have left complaining about that repetition, wishing it were different, comparing your life to other lives that seem more glamorous on social media. Or you can make the gesture Camus suggests. Claim what is yours. This routine is mine. These problems are mine. This body, this house, this family, these limits, all of it is mine. And I choose to inhabit it with presence, not as a victim. Nothing changes on the outside. The stone keeps rolling. The week keeps starting on Monday. The bills keep coming, but something shifts on the inside profoundly. You stop being a bitter spectator of your own life and start being its quiet author. Not an author in the sense of controlling everything, an author in the sense of taking responsibility for how you move through what you cannot control. So we arrive at the synthesis this video set out to offer. The Camusian solution to the problem of searching for meaning in everything is inverted, almost imperceptible. Stop demanding meaning from life and start giving meaning to life. That's the central sentence. Hold on to it. When you demand meaning, you are a creditor. You stand there waiting to receive something you think you're entitled to. You get frustrated when you don't receive it. You grow resentful of existence, of other people, of time. When you offer meaning, you become an author. You create, in every simple gesture, a significance that didn't exist before, and that only exists because you placed it there. That role is far more dignified than that of the dissatisfied creditor. Accepting cosmic silence from that perspective is not defeat. It's maturity. It's reaching a point in life where you stop waiting for your mother, your father, your boss, your partner, destiny, or the universe to come along and explain everything. You understand that no one is coming. And, in the same movement, you understand that you don't need anyone to come. You have your hands, you have your time, you have your attention. With that, you can already build a dignified, beautiful existence that is yours. Then, things you have probably sensed for a while begin to emerge. The desire to simplify life, an interest in nature, in silence, in simple routines, a preference for real conversations over loud social events, the joy of a morning with no commitments, the pleasure of a meal with no rush. None of that seems small anymore. It becomes, in fact, the center of life. This movement is not some spiritual novelty. It runs through very old traditions, from Buddhism to Stoicism, from Taoist wisdom to the Christian mystics. Camus isn't inventing it. He's just offering a modern version, without mandatory religion, without dogmas, accessible to anyone who has lost faith but hasn't lost the thirst to live with truth. It's a spirituality without a temple, a wisdom without a priest, a peace you cultivate yourself in your own backyard. And what is left in the end, when all the searching stops? What is left is what was always here. Trees, birds, good memories, beloved people, morning coffee, books open on the table. All those things you can only see when you stop chasing after something that was supposed to be somewhere else. That inner state is very different from the oppression that haunts those who are afraid of themselves. It is the stillness that only appears when inner peace settles in, when the mental noise of demands fades out, when the whirlwind of unanswered questions stops spinning. Whoever lives in that stillness starts to hear things that used to go unnoticed. You hear the wood of the floor aging. You hear the breathing of the dog sleeping on the rug. You hear the distant sound of a siren outside, and you realize that, in that very moment, someone is living through an emergency, and you send, without words, a quiet compassion to that stranger. The peace Camus describes is not the peace of ignorance. It is not the peace of someone who has never thought, never suffered, never doubted. It is the deep peace of someone who has seen the absurd, stared into the emptiness, acknowledged the repetition, and still chosen to say yes. Yes to the morning. Yes to the tired body. Yes to the person next to you. Yes to this life, exactly as it is, with everything it has and everything it lacks. That peace doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives in waves. On some random Sunday, you notice that you feel calm for no particular reason, and the surprise is a good one. At an ordinary dinner, you realize nothing is missing. On an aimless walk, you feel that the world is enough. Those small visits of peace start coming more often. One day, without any ceremony, they become the constant background of your life. And that, in the Camusian vocabulary, is the quiet victory of the absurd human being. Maybe you got this far carrying old exhaustion with you. Maybe at several points you recognized your own story. Maybe questions you didn't even know how to put into words were named for you by these words. If so, breathe deeply now. You don't have to answer everything today. You don't have to transform your life all at once. It's enough to start with one small gesture. Look around, recognize what is here, and be grateful for still being alive to see it. If this video made sense to you, leave a like. It helps the channel reach more people who need this kind of reflection. And if you want to go deeper on this path with exclusive content, denser and quieter, consider joining our members club until our next meeting.